Hi everybody. I think we should start. We're a bit late. We're here to present this book, The Red Web, by Andrei Soldato and Irina Borogan. They're both here. They're editor of agentura.ru. I'm Fabio Chiusi. I'm a freelance journalist, and I also cover these kind of topics I've been covering for quite a while. I think this panel is pretty interesting because, you know, it kind of gives a sense of what is, of how, you know, a democracy can turn into something different, you know, and censorship, propaganda, and surveillance online can play a huge role in how, you know, the government controls its citizens. And can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I think just some brief data just to give a sense of what is going on, but then we go a bit deeper into that, of course. There's this recent report by Agora called "The Triumph of Censorship," which says that in the last year, in 2015, the internet censorship in Russia grew ninefold. They say they have like 9,000 reports of censorship compared to 1,000 last year. They have more people actually sent in jail for expressing for expressing their opinion on the web. And they have. The government has fine-tuned its methods of filtering, they say, content in 2015, and also this on a national scale. So different regions in the country, they say, started a race of sorts among them to try and understand how to better implement the new laws that came into effect in the last 3 years or something, to 2013 and 14 especially. They say we had like this huge. And then we try this huge push for repression, and then of course we'll try and understand why. And we also know that Freedom House, for example, which is of course criticized in its methodology, it's been criticized several ways, but still they say that Russia is not a free country when it comes to internet freedom. So we have this huge machine of repression, which is made of censorship, it's made of surveillance, it's made of propaganda, it's made of organized trolling, we can say, and of course we have a lot of money involved, a lot of interests involved. So my first questions for both my guests here is, what exactly is this machine and how it works, like very broadly, in very broad terms? I know in the book you write that the censorship started on the television, on radios, and then it turned to the internet when they had a feeling, when the government had a feeling that it was the last bastion of free expression, the last way in which, you know, try to build an opposition against the Putin regime. So.
Thank you, hello, and thank you for having us here. Yes, it's all started in 2011, 2012, mostly because of the Moscow protests, because the government really believed that the Moscow protests were organized on Facebook and Twitter, and they wanted to do something with these new methods, tools of mobilizing people, of getting people into the streets. But what was very surprising for us was the fact that the Russian approach to control the internet was not actually about technology. And that might be the biggest difference between, say, Russian approach and American approach, or Russian approach and even Chinese approach. We do not have thousands of sensors. We do not have technologies which help the government to, say, monitor millions of people online. The idea of the Russian system of control is to use some technologies, but mostly to intimidate people, to spread fear, to send a very strong message that you should be very, very cautious in what you say and what you post online. And it seems that in this case, the Russian system, the Kremlin approach to control of the internet is, in a way, looks like the new generation of the Soviet approach to control information in Russia. We all heard of the KGB, of course, and we all think that the KGB was a really very powerful security agency, which might be one of the most powerful security services of that time. And when we researched for the book, we were really surprised to find that the KGB, at the head of the powers of its security service in the late 1980s in Moscow, were capable to tap only 300 people. But everybody in Moscow were quite certain that their phone calls might be intercepted. So the idea behind the KGB approach was to spread fear, to explain everybody, you might be tapped, your phone calls might be tapped. And we use all kinds of methods. When we got the internet, and when we got this new challenge of the internet in 2011, 2012, the authorities used almost the same approach. They remodeled the system of surveillance, but this system of surveillance is not mass surveillance. In this case, it's not comparable with the United States. We do not have people who routinely monitor and stare data on millions of people. The idea is to have a list of people, troublemakers, and then to spy on these people, and then to leak the information and they say intercept some video footage about them to pro-Kremlin television or pro-Kremlin media, and then something might happen with these people. Some of them will get killed. Like that happened last year with Boris Nemtsov, who was one of the biggest names in the Russian opposition. And we got the same approach with internet filtering. The idea was not actually to make the system effective in a way as, say, Chinese filtering system. The idea was to go after companies, big names, Russian companies, global companies like Google, Facebook, and to force them to play according to Russian demands and to play according to the rules and to force them to find technical solutions how to filter things. And in a way it was, and still is quite effective, because what we have now that it's for the Russian internet business to pay costs for filtering and surveillance. So in a way, it's much more cost-free in comparison with the United States and even with China. As I said, we do not have thousands of sensors. The Russian agency, which is in charge of censoring and filtering the internet, has over 20 people in Moscow directly responsible for creating blacklists of websites. It's for companies to take measures and to install special equipment, special software to actually to do filtering and to do surveillance.
So there is this system called SORM, if I get it right, and it was built actually before the internet, if I get it from the book.
Yes, yes, that was really one of the most surprising developments. The most surprising thing we found out is that the Russian system of internet surveillance was actually designed by the KGB in the late 80s, firstly for traditional phone communications. That's why it's so totalitarian.
Yeah, and now it went to the third stage, because the second stage of surveillance of internet communication, and now they're forcing providers to actually do DPI, the deep packet inspection. That's kind of scary. What does it really mean? Is it been enforced, or is it?
Yeah, we got. If I can, or maybe you can.
The first, we need to explain what does it mean, deep packet inspection. It's commercial technology that helps ISP, internet service providers, or telecommunication operator to intercept all your information, all information of users, rather it, I don't know, video or phone calls or just text messages and so on. And this technology that was created on the West disseminated free around the world, but in Russia, combining such kind of technology like DPI with legal interception of the security services is maybe and is very dangerous, because what legal interception can do. Legal interception organized by security services, say the FSB, can intercept particular users' information, person who are already known to the security service by his or her name or account on social networks or IP address or any identifier on the internet. And security services got some information that this person may be, I don't know, criminal or very, very dangerous opposition politician or civil activist, journalist, so on, and started to intercept his or her information. But DPI, but for the beginning, they need the information about this person. In terms of DPI, the security services using this technology and combining this technology with traditional SORM get a possibility to intercept, for example, to identify all participants of some internet conversation on some forum or discussion, and after that to identify everybody of them, and to understand who we're talking about, say, forthcoming mass protest in Moscow. That's very dangerous, and DPI is not under any kind of control because it's commercial technology.
So what is it that they can, just to give a sense to the public, what is it that you cannot do on the Russian internet, which puts you in danger?
Now, thanks to this combination of SORM with DPI, if you say something and you use some words which might trigger the attention of the system, which might be a protest rally, might be the name of some opposition leaders, might be some specific things about political events in Moscow, that might trigger the system to identify you. Yeah. And you might end up in the list of these troublemakers.
Yeah, so it's kind of blacklists.
It's not about blocking of someone. It's about the list of people who might be then fully investigated and the way communications would be intercepted.
And also become target of propaganda and everything.
Everything, yeah. Especially because the idea of the Russian approach, as I said, it's based on intimidation. And to make it workable and effective, you need to intimidate not only people who are already very well known in the country. Yeah. Sometimes a very good idea to try to find someone in region, completely no name, some low-level activist, and to send him to jail. Because other people would say, look, I am not so prominent. So if I even start saying something or write something on the internet critical of the government, nobody would stand for me. And that might ruin my career, my life, etc. So it's better to, well, not to do anything.
So it's also about self-censorship, getting people to self-censorship.
Right.
I see. And how does this, because we also read a lot in different newspapers, also the New York Times made an investigation some time ago about this organized trolling. It's a kind of equivalent of the Chinese 50-cent party, I think, maybe. That people getting paid like very low wages to just stay in a building in St. Petersburg or in Moscow and just, reply with comments favorable to the Putin's regime when everything is said online. How does this thing work exactly? Did you get a sense of how it's organized? Is it directed from the Kremlin directly, or is it something that comes from self-organizing or from fans? Or
actually, it's this thing is not so new. Actually, we got this thing first in the mid of 2000s, and back then, the most popular platform for Russian bloggers was LiveJournal. Yeah. And the one of the most important options on LiveJournal was the thing that you were allowed to comment anonymously. And by the mid of 2000s, lots of liberal journalists they lost their jobs, and the only place, the only space where they can express their opinions was actually a LiveJournal, and they got sometimes millions of followers. So the idea of trolls, firstly, was to have people, activists of pro-Kremlin youth movements, to start commenting on their pages, and actually not to change the direction of the debate, but to contaminate the place, to make it dirty.
To crush the debate.
Actually, to crush the debate. Yeah. They never actually say anything meaningful. They just try to attack you personally, and sometimes they can use personal information, lots of bad language, and people just leave this particular page. But by 2011, when we got the protests in Moscow, trolls found themselves absolutely useless, because that was the very moment when most of democratic opposition and liberal people in Moscow and big cities, they just moved from LiveJournal to Facebook. And it was impossible, and it is impossible, to comment anonymously on Facebook. And for some years, trolls were absolutely clueless what to do. And the next stage, and they reinvented themselves only in 2014, mostly because of the events in Ukraine. Why? Because it was not about Facebook. It was about Vkontakte. And Vkontakte is a Russian social network which looks very similar to Facebook. And it's, by chance, it's the most popular social network also in Ukraine. So you have lots of Ukrainians talking about their political events, but we are talking, and these debates actually take place on social network which is based in Russia. And the Russian authorities tried first some direct pressure. They pressured the owner of Vkontakte to, for example, to give details and identities of Ukrainian protesters to the Russian security services. Pavel Durov, who was the owner of and chief executive officer of Vkontakte, he refused, and he was forced to first to abandon his company and then to leave the country. But finally, by April, March of 2014, we got lots of trolls, again, people from these pro-Kremlin youth movements, talking with Ukrainians of Vkontakte about what's going on in Ukraine. And because we used something which is, has something to do not with technology, but with our common legacy, which means we are all born in the Soviet Union, and we share sometimes mentality, sometimes prejudices, sometimes memories. And for example, in Russia and Ukraine, in most of our families, we have people who were killed in the Second World War. That means that if you say that someone is a fascist, immediately trigger this emotional reaction. And that was used by trolls, because all opposition leaders in Ukraine were accused of being fascist, of promoting fascism, about we have the new Second World War coming, blah, blah, blah. And that makes it, again, very sound and very effective on the soul of Ukraine. And only after that, trolls decided to spread their activities and started targeting the audiences in the West. It was not so successful. In Ukraine, it was much more successful, but still we are trying.
Still trying. So, Irina, there is one law that has been passed in 2014 that requiring registration of bloggers and everything, and especially the keeping of data about Russian users on Russian soil. And I know there have been problems of enforcement of this law, but are they trying? What's the situation there? Because a lot of people, a lot of commentators around the world, they say that this is kind of it can be one of the bad consequences of the so-called NSA scandal, because the fact is that instead of having data stored in the U.S. with certain guarantees. Hopefully, we see not that many anyway, but of course maybe more than the ones we have when Russian FSB is in charge of the data. Is it happening or?
Difficult to say right now, because the law was adopted last year, and it should be started to implement since January.
No, September.
But they promised to punish a company like Google, Twitter, and YouTube since January.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, no one of this company was punished for not transferring, not moving their service on the Russian soil. But so far, we don't know which companies complied with the law and which did not. We don't know. I asked many times Google's representatives, did you comply with the law, and did you move your servers on the Russian soil in Russia? And that for us, Russian users, or politicians, or civil activists, or just people who want to save their data in private, means that our communications via Google services or Twitter services not safety, not safe, because before servers were moved to Russia, encryption was in place, and the FSB, for example, could intercept our communications, but they could not decrypt it. But if the services are placed in Russia, the Russian security services have an ability to get access to your information before encryption directly by the cable that leads to the servers. That's why we are so worried about this law. But we can say that it is happening now. Because we don't know where the servers are.
So we don't really even.
Are they still in the United States or they are in Russia? But if they did, it will be very bad for us.
Of course, and they also this proves the fact that we don't really need to break encryption if we can have the data before they get encrypted. So, which is also a worldwide debate. And are you having that kind of debate also in Russia about encryption or not?
We got some. Well, that's a very sad situation, a very sad story, because we tried to for 2 years actually to inspire some debate in Russia, especially after Snowden came to Russia. We thought, look, now that might trigger some debate. And if you remember, Snowden, when he asked his question to Vladimir Putin about mass surveillance in Russia, we also thought that also might help to provoke this debate. Unfortunately, even Russian activists didn't want to talk about privacy and didn't want to implement encryption and to use these things. And finally, I thought, look, it's all absolutely useless. We cannot do much. It's just impossible. We brought lots of people from Canada, from United States, or from United Kingdom to Russia to talk about privacy. We brought people from EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, from Privacy International, from Citizen Lab, from other organizations to Moscow to talk about these things. It was absolutely useless, unless one important point. In the fall of the last year, the Russian government made a huge mistake, completely unexpected. They decided to ban one of the biggest Russian websites which share illegally movies. And in 2 weeks, Russia get to the second place of number of users of Tor network. Now, if you look at the statistics of Tor, we are second-ranking country, just after the United States. So maybe sometimes...
And that's why they want to find VPNs now, right now.
Right.
Why not?
So, sometimes you try to explain things rationally, talking about these dangers. Sometimes you need this kind of moves made by the government.
Of course. I know in the book they're also a bit critical about Edward Snowden himself, saying that he could have done a bit more, since one is on Russian soil, in hiding, of course. But he could have been a bit more, active in fighting surveillance and the attacks of freedom. Do you still think that, or do you think he hasn't done enough, or?
Well, of course, we never expected him to fight for internet freedoms in Russia. It's not his war, after all. What we expected him to do was actually 2 things. The first thing is we don't quite understand the reasons why he decided to be so untransparent, completely in the dark in Moscow. What do I mean? I mean that it's absolutely impossible for Moscow journalists, for Russian journalists, or for foreign journalists based in Moscow to talk to Snowden. It's just impossible. all the interviews you see were conducted and done by journalists who come to Moscow for purpose, to talk to Snowden. Even for the Moscow correspondent of The Guardian, it was absolutely, and it's still impossible to talk to Mr. Snowden. And I think the only reason why is because we have so many questions about his circumstances in Moscow. For example, why Mr. Snowden decided to choose as his lawyer and representative in Moscow a guy who is extremely close to the Russian security services. He is actually the member of the advisory board of the Federal Security Service of Russia. And we just wanted to ask this question, why?
I think you have to understand how he is in an uneasy situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's not in a position to choose his lawyers in Russia. He was provided by lawyers, and he have to agree, because that's the, I don't know, conditions why he is on Russian soil.
Well, maybe it needs to be properly reported, and that should be established. And the second thing which we think is important is that too many things were done in Russia justified by Snowden revelations. I mean, a lot of legislation we got over the last 2 years were presented to the public in Russia as a response to NSA scandal. Like we got this legislation about data localization, which we talked before, that forced companies to store their data on the Russian soil under pretext of protecting personal data of Russian citizens. Actually, nobody asked them to do that. And instead, we got a petition last fall, and more than 40,000 people signed this petition asking global companies not to relocate their data to Russia. The problem was that Mr. Snowden decided not to comment at all how his revelations were used by the Russian authorities. He made some critical remarks about the state of the internet in Russia, but he never commented specifically about how his revelations were used.
I see. These are very specific points. Or maybe he'll answer, I don't know. But still, how is the situation of online dissent in Russia? Is there some kind of movement right now? Are there some channels that are being used, some victories that have been obtained against the regime or some sort, or what do you think? Because in 2011 it was pretty clear, you know, something was about to happen, and then you had like this crush in response. And now, from what I read on the reports, it's more of an enforcement thing. Like we set in place a whole legislation, a whole environment, also intimidation and everything. And now we're just going to go after these guys. What's going on now? How are they responding?
We were happy to have internet absolutely free till 2012. So it was good in terms that networks was constructed and built up as absolutely free, not as it was done in China when sensors were before network. Yeah. So that's our advantages. And the next advantage is that Putin and his people don't understand the nature of the network, the nature of the internet. He many times said that there should be a guy, he believes that there should be a guy at the top who ruled all whole of the internet, and one time he said that this is CIA, because the internet was CIA creation, and we all know that it was not CIA creation. Another agency was behind the creation of the internet. At the same time, and so his policy, based on this opinion, is that the authorities have to put pressure on internet companies, say social networks like Vkontakte, or internet giants like Google, Twitter, and so on, and companies started to suppress internet freedom by their own. And in terms of Vkontakte, what happened? In 2014, the popular social network Vkontakte was placed under the Kremlin control. Her founder, Pavel Durov, and creator, was expelled from the country, and the company was bought by pro-Kremlin oligarchs Alisher Usmanov. And the successors of Pavel Durov on this social network ВКонтакте was a very interesting person. His name Boris Dobrodeyev, and he's the son of the chief all-state Russia television empire, RTR. His father, his name is Oleg Dobrodeyev. So the situation was the father is controlled all state Russia television, and his son is in charge for the most popular social network in Russia. And from the Putin's point of view, there should not be any problem with social network, because now their guys are controlled and chief executive of the company ВКонтакте. But what happened in reality? In after annexation of Crimea, when the war in Ukraine started, the Russian authority denied their military presence in Ukraine, and but very soon, even in summer of 2014, Russian and Ukrainian journalists started to find out a lot of profiles, dozens of profiles of Russian soldiers who boasted of their exploits in Ukraine, and they posted a lot of information on the social network ВКонтакте by themselves about their locations, about what they were doing there, their names, the names of units, and so on. It was found out, and it was spreading around the net, and that was crystal clear that Russian army, Russian militaries was in Ukraine, and there was no any other proofs. And social networks information was information generated by soldiers themselves and shared by users of social network ВКонтакте help to reveal the truth. And it was Boris Dobrodeyev, who was successor of the Pavel Durov, could not do anything against this. That's I think that it's very optimistic, because authorities could not do anything with social networks, and they could not prevent to sharing information on the social network, because the content is generated by users, not by the company's employees, and not by the, I don't know, Boris Dobrodeyev, who is in control of the companies, and not even by the journalists, like in traditional media, that is very, very easy to suppress from the top, from, I don't know, chief and editor, or, and that's, I don't know, that's positive side of the process. That's why I believe that we can win the Kremlin and make information free.
Nice. What's your experience as journalists in Russia talking about these things, you know, writing constantly about these issues? Do you feel under threat? Do you feel under surveillance?
Well, one of the biggest things is that this book is published in English, but it's not published in Russian.
Yeah, exactly. That was one of my points.
And well, that's actually, it's a very good illustration of what's going on. We both started working as journalists in 1996. Well, in the 2000s, it's getting more and more difficult to work as investigative journalists in Russia, because well, we started in 2000, for example, every Moscow big publication had an investigative department, and consisted of 5-7 people. And last year we tried to count how many investigative journalists we have in Moscow. And we have some debate, and finally the figure is about 6 or 7. Wow. So the thing is, but actually the editors now are not very happy to publish investigative stories. It's getting really, really difficult to find a place to get published. And that's why, for example, for us now is the only option is if you have something, first to get it published in the West. For example, we worked on the project of, we tried to investigate the surveillance equipment installed in Sochi before the Olympic Games. Well, they published this report on the front page of The Guardian. And only after that was published in The Guardian, some weeks later, some Russian publications published chunks of this investigation. But they asked us specifically to keep this byline, that first time it was published by The Guardian, to shift the responsibility. So the problem is that, look, it looks like if you want to do something, you need to find a way to publish it somewhere, and then maybe this information might find its way back to Russia.
And I want to say that we were first interrogated by the FSB, the main security service in Russia, in 2002, being a very young journalist. And in reality, the FSB stopped our investigation for a month because we were interrogated many times in the building of the prison where the investigative department of the FSB located. And because we have to went to this building, and I don't know, once a week, under maybe a couple of weeks, all our sources that were most of them were closely connected, or was the FSB or other law enforcement agencies employees ceased to contact with us because because of fear to be under surveillance. So that was their, I don't know, victory.
Well, for the security services, of course, it was a very clear victory because they prevented us from investigating things for months. And this story repeated itself many times since then. And sometimes you might face really crazy accusations. Like one of the latest accusations I faced was that I somehow provoked a guy, a Russian foreign intelligence officer, who was chief of the foreign intelligence station in New York. He fled, actually he not fled, he defected to the United States in 2000. And many years later, in 2009 or 8, he talked to an American journalist, and the book was published. So, and I interviewed with these guys, and I made a publication about this story. So the FSB tried to accuse me of provoking this guy, who was by then under protection of FBI and CIA, so nobody knows his name, his new name. So they tried to accuse me of provoking this guy to talk to an American journalist and to have his book published. And that was really strange because I never met this guy. How can I provoke him to do these things? And that was the most amazing glimpse into the mentality. Because my question, quite reasonable question, was, okay, so how do you formulate the criminal accusation? They told me, well, disclosing of state secret. I said, look, could you tell me when you started this case, when he actually defected in 2000, or when the book was published in 2008? And they told me, of course, in 2008. So it seems they really supposed that for 8 years, this guy, under protection of FBI and CIA, never talked to this guy and never disclosed any secrets. And only when the book was published, they decided to start the official investigation of disclosing of state secrets.
We still have 10 minutes or so, so if there are any questions from the public, please do. There's just a microphone there somewhere. So there's one question here also. Oh, okay, go. Yeah,
I got the microphone.
Go for it.
Soon I will pass. Thank you for the very brave and interesting work you do. My question is, move from something that I thought I knew from the experience of meeting a few Russian people, let's say middle-class intellectual Russian, that when they were faced from me as a European with these issues and the fact that with Putin there is censorships and stuff like that, the normal answer was not that bad and was kind of a bad that you have to deal with in order to avoid something much worse. which I don't know what it was, but that was pretty much the question. And I always thought that I met the wrong Russians. But now, listening to what you said, especially Andrei explained about the Russian society, I understand that as much as the pressure and the censorship has grown in these years, there was not same growing of awareness to what is coming in the Russian society. So my question is very short. Why?
Well, the thing is that many years ago, actually back in 1999, so it's 17 years ago, the Russian authorities, they found a trick, a magic trick. And that was the time of a huge economic crisis in Russia. And the middle classes and intelligentsia suffered a lot. And they got the feeling of betrayal. They felt, look, we all learned English, we tried to behave, well, just like Westerners, and we tried to build new companies and to play and to build capitalism in our country, and now we lost everything. So there should be someone to blame. And in 1999, it was the time of the bombings of Belgrade in Serbia. And the authorities immediately seized it with opportunity that we can channel these feelings of betrayal against the West. And they send a very strong message. Look, yes, we try to play according to the rules, but actually the West is a very hypocritical, I don't know, structure, and we always try to do something with Russia, and we cannot trust them. And this trick was played again and again for all these years. For example, in 2008, the middle classes already felt quite disappointed with Putin. Well, 8 years passed. Well, we got some prosperity, but actually, well, we cannot tolerate this guy anymore. And we got the war in Georgia. And the trick played by the authorities was to say, look, not to show, say, the atrocities of the Georgian army. The trick was to show how hypocritical is Western media coverage of the war, to send the same message. It's all about hypocrisy of the West. And now with Ukraine, we try to play the same trick, and with Syria the same trick, always the same, that we have this fundamental battle between the West and Russia. And Russia always should feel some sort of, I don't know, but we are surrounded by enemies, and the Russian propaganda is actually directed to inspire this feeling of betrayal and grievance against the West. And it works because, yes, because
so far
it works. Yeah, so far it works.
You know, economic crisis is growing in Russia, so it may not, it couldn't be so helpful in future, I think, to put blame on the West.
But there is one last question here.
Спасибо вам большое, было очень интересно. I would like to ask a question. How would you describe the system that is working? So it's not like China, right? It's not what's going on in China. So what you say is like, in a way, it's okay. It's kind of a dictatorship in the internet as well, but at the same time, it's like anarchy. You know, it's like not. It's not. How would you describe this system? You know, what's the best word to describe the Russian system? How they're watching the internet, because it's different from China, right?
Russian system of internet is based on intimidation more than technology, and you know, to circumvent blocking, you can use any very simple tools like Tor or VPN or even Google Translate to put link on the one side and get it on the other side and go to the website. So blocking is not total. It isn't like China, but every month the authorities are trying to restrict and to put more restrictive legislation on the internet. But so far, I can't say that they could prevent information from spreading. No. But at the same time, on the other side, in terms of journalists, bloggers, and people with opinions, for 2 or 3 last year, we have had more more people sent to prison for expressing their opinions on the internet. It used to be a few people a few years ago, but now dozens of people get sent to prison for nothing, for just posting something like that. Russian occupants go home. Talking on Ukraine, something like that. It's enough. It's enough to get 1 or 2 years in prison.
So it's mostly about intimidation.
So that's bad, because it's you have to implement to develop self-censorship, not to be a subject of anti-extremist legislation that could end up for you in prison or in court. No. If you will be happy.
So thanks very much. We're out of time.
Yeah, sorry.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Hi everybody. I think we should start. We're a bit late. We're here to present this book, The Red Web, by Andrei Soldato and Irina Borogan. They're both here. They're editor of agentura.ru. I'm Fabio Chiusi. I'm a freelance journalist, and I also cover these kind of topics I've been covering for quite a while. I think this panel is pretty interesting because, you know, it kind of gives a sense of what is, of how, you know, a democracy can turn into something different, you know, and censorship, propaganda, and surveillance online can play a huge role in how, you know, the government controls its citizens. And can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I think just some brief data just to give a sense of what is going on, but then we go a bit deeper into that, of course. There's this recent report by Agora called "The Triumph of Censorship," which says that in the last year, in 2015, the internet censorship in Russia grew 9-fold. They say they have like 9,000 reports of censorship compared to 1,000 last year. They have more people actually sent in jail for expressing for expressing their opinion on the web. And they have. The government has fine-tuned its methods of filtering, they say, content in 2015, and also this on a national scale. So different regions in the country, they say, started a race of sorts among them to try and understand how to better implement the
KGB, at the head of the power Soviet security service in the late 1980s in Moscow, were capable to tap only 300 people. But everybody in Moscow were quite certain that their phone calls might be intercepted. So the idea behind the KGB approach was to spread fear, to explain everybody, you might be tapped, your phone calls might be tapped. And we use all kinds of methods. When we got the internet, and when we got this new challenge of the internet in 2011, 2012, the authorities used almost the same approach. They remodeled the system of surveillance, but this system of surveillance is not mass surveillance. In this case, it's not comparable with the United States. We do not have people who routinely monitor and stare data on millions of people. The idea is to have a list of people, troublemakers, and then to spy on these people, and then to leak the information and they say intercept some video footage about them to pro-Kremlin television or pro-Kremlin media, and then something might happen with these people. Some of them will get killed. Like that happened last year with Boris Nemtsov, who was one of the biggest names in the Russian opposition. And we got the same approach with internet filtering. The idea was not actually to make the system effective in a way as, say, Chinese filtering system. The idea was with these new methods, tools of mobilizing people, of getting people into the streets. But what was very surprising for us was the fact that the Russian approach to control the internet was not actually about technology. And that might be the biggest difference between, say, Russian approach and American approach, or Russian approach and even Chinese approach. We do not have thousands of sensors. We do not have technologies which help the government to, say, monitor millions of people online. The idea of the Russian system of control is to use some technologies, but mostly to intimidate people, to spread fear, to send a very strong message that you should be very, very cautious in what you say and what you post online. And it seems that in this case, the Russian system, the Kremlin approach to control of the internet is, in a way, looks like the new generation of the Soviet approach to control information in Russia. We all heard of the KGB, of course, and we all think that the KGB was a really very powerful security agency, which might be one of the most powerful security services of that time. And when we researched for the book, we were really surprised to find that
the new laws that came into effect in the last 3 years or something, to 2013 and 14 especially, they say we had like this huge, and then we try this huge push for repression, and then of course we'll try and understand why. And we also know that Freedom House, for example, which is of course criticized in its methodology, it's been criticized several ways, but still they say that Russia is not a free country when it comes to internet freedom. So we have this huge machine of repression, which is made of censorship, it's made of surveillance, it's made of propaganda, it's made of organized trolling, we can say, and of course we have a lot of money involved, a lot of interests involved. So my first questions for both my guests here is, what exactly is this machine and how it works, like very broadly, in very broad terms? I know in the book you write that the censorship started on the television, on radios, and then it turned to the internet when they had a feeling, when the government had a feeling that it was the last bastion of free expression, the last way in which, you know, trying to build an opposition against the Putin regime. So.
Thank you, hello, and thank you for having us here. Yes, it's all started in 2011, 2012, mostly because of the Moscow protests, because the government really believed that the Moscow protests were organized on Facebook and Twitter, and they wanted to do something to go after companies, big names, Russian companies, global companies like Google, Facebook, and to force them to play according to Russian demands and to play according to the rules, and to force them to find technical solutions how to filter things. And in a way it was, and still is quite effective, because what we have now, that it's for the Russian internet business to pay costs for filtering and surveillance. So in a way, it's much more cost-free in comparison with the United States, and even with China. As I said, we do not have thousands of sensors. The Russian agency, which is in charge of censoring and filtering the internet, has over 20 people in Moscow directly responsible for creating blacklists of websites. It's for companies to take measures and to install special equipment, special software to actually to do filtering and to do surveillance.
So there is this system called SORM, if I get it right, and it was built actually before the internet, if I get it from the book.
Yes, yes, that was really one of the most surprising development. The most surprising thing we found out is that the Russian system of internet surveillance was actually designed by the KGB in the late 80s, firstly for traditional phone communications. That's why it's so totalitarian.
Yeah, and now it went to the third stage, because the second stage of surveillance of